November 1941. The Pacific dawn is muted, grey mist drifting over the vast expanse of water. Waves lap quietly against the hulls of ships, anchored far from the eyes of the world. Somewhere in the heart of the US Navy's forward network, a radar operator leans over a glowing screen. His breath fogs in the cool pre-dawn air. Blips flicker, tiny points of light moving across a dark grid. Outside, the ocean seems calm, almost serene. Yet the stillness is deceptive. Hundreds of miles away, Japanese warships glide through the waters, their crews confident that no American eyes can detect them. They are moving toward their target with precision and purpose, unaware that a silent American sentinel watches from afar. This technology, untested in real combat, will become the unseen force that shifts the balance. Before a single American ship is spotted, before any gun is fired, radar will whisper the secrets of the enemy's movements. The fate of fleets and the lives of thousands hinge on what the human eye cannot see. From this moment, history begins to turn. By late 1941, the world had been at war for more than 2 years. In Europe, battles raged across the continent, but the Pacific was a stage of tension and silent preparation. Japan, expanding rapidly through Southeast Asia, had secured territories rich in resources, oil, rubber and tin, that were essential for its war machine. With Europe preoccupied and the United States hesitant to commit fully to conflict, Japanese planners believed the Pacific could be dominated swiftly. The US Pacific Fleet, centered at Pearl Harbor, was the primary obstacle to Japanese ambitions. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers and aircraft carriers formed a formidable force, yet its commanders faced limitations. Communications were slow, reconnaissance was imperfect, and the vast distances of the Pacific meant that early warning of enemy movement was often impossible. In the archipelago of islands, every hour counted. Amid this uncertainty, a quiet revolution in technology was unfolding. Radar, an electronic system capable of detecting ships and aircraft beyond visual range, had been developed in experimental form since the mid-1930s. The US Navy's primary systems, known as SCR-270 and SCR-271, were installed on land-based stations and a handful of ships. These early models could detect large objects at tens of miles, but operators were still learning how to interpret the signals. Many in command remained skeptical, viewing the glowing screens with curiosity but not yet full confidence. Japanese naval intelligence relied heavily on reconnaissance and coded communications. Their ships could move hundreds of miles undetected if the Americans lacked visual contact or aircraft coverage. Planning for large-scale operations required absolute secrecy and precise timing. This confidence, however, would soon collide with technology. The Japanese had underestimated the radar. In the months leading up to December 1941, radar stations were being placed strategically across the Pacific. At Opana Point in Hawaii, for example, SCR-270 units stood on high cliffs, their operators scanning the horizon in shifts day and night. Training was rudimentary but rigorous. Operators learned to distinguish blips from waves, flocks of birds, or even atmospheric anomalies. Each correct interpretation could save lives. Each mistake could allow the enemy to strike unopposed. Commanders faced the dual challenge of integrating this new technology while maintaining traditional vigilance. Visual lookouts and aerial reconnaissance were still the primary sources of intelligence, yet radar offered the tantalizing possibility of seeing beyond the horizon. For some officers, it was a game-changer in theory. For others, it was an unproven curiosity, something that might fail at the most critical moment. As Japanese fleets moved south from the Kuril Islands and east from the Marshall Islands, the Pacific waters became a theater of invisible motion. Japanese carriers, battleships, and support vessels glided over vast distances, their formations disciplined, their crews confident in their ability to strike without warning. In the American command centers, maps were updated daily, and reports of enemy sightings were recorded, but the exact timing and location of Japanese movements remained uncertain. The contrast between the unseen enemy and the silent potential of radar created tension among American officers and sailors alike. The stakes could not have been higher. A miscalculation could mean the destruction of ships, aircraft, and thousands of lives in a single strike. Every hour, every decision, Every blip on the radar screen mattered. Radar, still in its infancy, represented both promise and uncertainty. It demanded human skill and intuition to translate electrical signals into actionable intelligence. Operators, often young and inexperienced, carried immense responsibility, knowing that the first warning might be the difference between life and death. Their focus was absolute, their nerves taut, as the ocean stretched endlessly before them. By November 1941, the pieces were set. The Japanese Navy moved confidently, unaware of the silent American watchers. The U.S. Pacific Fleet, anchored and vulnerable, relied on a technology that few yet trusted fully. In these conditions, the stage was set for a confrontation that would test human skill, technological innovation, and the ability to perceive the unseen. The coming days would demonstrate that radar was more than just a machine. It was a new dimension of warfare, one that could detect the enemy before a single ship was ever sighted. While the early American radar systems were promising, they were far from flawless. The SCR-270, a long-range unit, could detect large vessels or aircraft up to 100 miles away under ideal conditions, yet its resolution was crude. Operators saw blips on a screen, simple dots against a dark backdrop, with no identifying features. Distinguishing friend from foe required judgment, training, and sometimes intuition. Weather, sea state, and interference could all distort readings. Despite these limitations, Naval Command recognized the strategic potential. Information gathered before visual contact could offer precious time to respond, reposition, or avoid engagement entirely. At Pearl Harbor, radar coverage was still patchy. Outposts at Opana Point, Kauai, and other coastal sites scanned relentlessly, their operators rotating in shifts, eyes fixed on the screens for hours at a time. Training manuals emphasized patience and accuracy. A single misread blip could send fleets on a false alert or, worse, leave them blind to an approaching threat. Officers worked to integrate radar into traditional reconnaissance, creating layered networks of early warning that stretched across the Hawaiian archipelago. The men operating these units were often young, technical-minded sailors and signalmen. For many, this was their first real test in combat conditions. They had learned the theory, memorized the signals, and practiced drills, but nothing could fully prepare them for the reality of enemy fleets moving unseen beneath the Pacific sun. Their focus was absolute, a constant vigilance against both natural and human deception. Every movement on the screen represented a choice: report, ignore, or wait for confirmation. The pressure was immense. Meanwhile, Japanese naval planners assumed that American detection capabilities were limited to visual reconnaissance and patrol aircraft. Japanese intelligence had identified Pearl Harbor as the primary target for a decisive strike to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Carriers, battleships, cruisers, and support vessels moved in carefully coordinated formations, relying on radio silence and strict operational discipline. The Japanese believed they could approach undetected, relying on the vastness of the Pacific and the limitations of enemy observation. They had no knowledge that a new, unseen technology was poised to track their movements, even in the dead of night. In addition to the strategic geography, timing played a critical role. Japanese fleets departed from bases in the Kuril Islands, the Marshall Islands, and the Caroline Islands in staggered movements to avoid detection. They crossed hundreds of miles of open ocean, their crews confident in their ability to remain hidden. Every hour of transit brought them closer to their objectives, yet also deeper into the effective range of the American radar network. Integration of radar into fleet operations was not uniform. Some ships carried mobile SCR-270 units. Others relied solely on visual lookouts. Communication lines were tested constantly, as operators sent reports to Fleet Command for evaluation. In many cases, skepticism still shadowed the technology. Senior officers trained in traditional naval methods were cautious. They had seen mechanical systems fail before, yet the potential advantage was undeniable. If radar could detect enemy movements before a single ship was sighted, it could provide a decisive edge. November 1941 saw the final stages of preparation. Radar units were operational operators were alert, and the Pacific Fleet maintained a posture of readiness, though unaware of the precise locations of Japanese forces. The vast ocean, a theater of potential disaster, became a place of tension and anticipation. Every passing hour tested the patience and nerve of American sailors, their minds attuned to the screens that would reveal what the human eye could not. The stage was set for a convergence of technology, human skill, and strategic planning. The Japanese fleet moved with confidence, believing in the invisibility granted by distance and discipline. The Americans, relying on the invisible eyes of radar, prepared to detect the enemy before they could strike. The coming days would demonstrate that radar was no longer a laboratory experiment. It was a new weapon, capable of transforming the earliest moments of engagement and the fate of entire fleets before a single shot was fired. The careful coordination of radar networks, the vigilance of operators, and the disciplined deployment of ships and stations would converge to create a moment of unprecedented strategic clarity. This technology, still young and untested in full combat, was about to reveal its true potential. And it was in this convergence that the angles of human skill, technological innovation, and tactical foresight would become inseparable. The first angle of this story is the human one. The radar operators, often young, sometimes barely out of their teens, found themselves at the front lines of a war they could not see. They sat in dimly lit rooms, eyes glued to glowing screens, interpreting blips that might represent ships, aircraft, or nothing at all. The pressure was immense. One false reading could trigger panic, or worse, allow the enemy to approach undetected. The weight of responsibility was magnified by isolation. These operators were physically removed from the action yet emotionally at its center. Each dot on the radar screen carried the potential for life or death, for victory or disaster. Their work required patience, discipline, and an intuitive sense of timing, transforming raw data into actionable intelligence for commanders who would decide the fate of ships and crews based on their reports. Next is the technological angle. Radar in 1941 was cutting edge. The SCR-270 and SCR-271 systems were primitive by modern standards, but they were revolutionary in concept. Long pulses of radio waves emitted from antennas would bounce off metallic objects, returning echoes to the operator. These echoes, displayed as moving blips on a cathode ray tube, represented enemy positions beyond visual range, yet radar had limits. Accuracy decreased with distance and weather conditions. Operators had to distinguish meaningful signals from clutter, waves, rain, flocks of birds, or atmospheric interference. Despite these limitations, the technology provided the U.S. Navy with something unprecedented: early warning. It was the first time human eyes could perceive the invisible movements of an enemy fleet, and even a partial detection could be decisive. The tactical angle further underscores radar's potential. In conventional naval warfare, visual spotting and reconnaissance aircraft determined engagement timing. Surprise was everything. A fleet unseen could dictate the tempo of battle. With radar, however, the Americans could anticipate enemy movements before a single ship was sighted. Fleet commanders could adjust positions, ready air patrols, and prepare defensive measures in advance. It was a new form of situational awareness, a layer of intelligence that bridged geography and time. Radar shifted naval tactics from reaction to preemption, from waiting for the enemy to imposing control over the battlefield even before engagement. This subtle but transformative shift would become critical in the days leading to conflict. Human leadership is another angle intertwined with technology. Commanders had to make decisions based on incomplete information from a system that many still doubted. Some officers embraced radar reports immediately, trusting the skill of operators and the accuracy of the new machines. Others hesitated, preferring traditional methods of visual confirmation. This tension between innovation and experience defined command in the Pacific Fleet. Leaders were forced to balance skepticism with the pressing need for timely decisions, weighing the risk of acting on an untested technology against the consequences of delay. In doing so, they laid the groundwork for integrating radar into operational doctrine, demonstrating adaptability under pressure, a key factor in the eventual effectiveness of American forces. The enemy angle reveals the contrast between confidence and vulnerability. Japanese naval intelligence, while disciplined and effective, relied on the assumption that distance and radio silence ensured concealment. Japanese commanders did not anticipate that American technology could detect their movements long before visual contact. Their formations, designed for maximum speed and surprise, unknowingly entered the detection envelope of US radar units. This gap in understanding would prove critical. Technology leveled the playing field in an unexpected way, highlighting that the invisible observer could hold as much influence as the visible force. The Japanese, operating under assumptions of stealth, were moving toward a trap not yet fully realized, a trap defined by electrons, not eyes. Finally, there is the moral and psychological angle. Radar created a new dimension of tension for American sailors. Operators knew they could see what others could not, yet they were powerless to act alone. Their vigilance carried moral weight. Warning or failing to warn could determine lives lost. For Japanese sailors, unknowingly tracked across the ocean, the psychological edge lay entirely with the Americans. The invisible surveillance instilled a kind of strategic anxiety, an early reminder that warfare was evolving beyond traditional human senses. These psychological elements, subtle yet profound, underscore how radar changed not only tactics but the perception of control, confidence, and fear in the Pacific theater. Through these angles, the human, technological, tactical, leadership, enemy, and moral perspectives, the full significance of radar emerges. It was not merely a device. It was a lens through which the unseen could be made visible, through which ordinary sailors became the guardians of entire fleets, and through which commanders could anticipate the enemy's every move. Each angle reinforces the same truth. Radar was the silent force that shaped strategy, influenced decisions, and ultimately altered the course of naval warfare. These perspectives converge to a single moment, where preparation, skill, and technology intersect. The blips on the screen are no longer abstract. They are real, present, and consequential. This convergence sets the stage for a pivotal turning point, a moment when the unseen becomes decisive, when radar shifts from a tool of observation to an instrument of action. The first focus in this second section is the continued human perspective, but now through the lens of leadership under uncertainty. Fleet commanders faced a paradox. They were expected to act decisively based on information from a system many still doubted. Officers had to interpret early radar reports and integrate them with reconnaissance, visual spotting, and intelligence intercepts. The margin for error was razor-thin. Acting too aggressively could expose the fleet unnecessarily, while hesitation could allow enemy forces to approach undetected. The burden on these leaders was immense. Decisions made in this fragile balance were not theoretical. They would determine whether ships and sailors survived the coming hours. Command required not just understanding of technology, but trust in the judgment of those operating it, a trust that could only be earned through consistent accuracy under pressure. The technological angle now deepens, focusing on the evolution of radar deployment. By late 1941, the US Navy had begun placing radar not just on fixed land stations, but on select ships, creating a layered detection network. Mobile units extended coverage, allowing commanders to receive reports in real time from forward positions. The SCR-270, while rudimentary, demonstrated the value of range and continuous monitoring. Operators had developed techniques to filter out interference and interpret signal patterns. What was once experimental technology had become operational, capable of giving the US Navy an early edge in detecting enemy movement across vast distances. The combination of skill and innovation transformed radar from an isolated tool into an integrated element of fleet strategy. The tactical angle continues with a focus on anticipation and maneuver. Radar allowed commanders to see beyond the horizon, effectively shrinking the uncertainty of open ocean operations. Fleet formations could be adjusted, aircraft sorties timed, and defensive measures preemptively deployed. This was particularly crucial in the Pacific, where distances between islands and fleets stretched hundreds of miles. With early detection, the US Navy could gain the initiative, rather than simply reacting to Japanese movements. The tactical advantage offered by radar went beyond information. It changed the rhythm of engagement, shifting from reactive to proactive, from uncertainty to calculated action. Leadership and decision-making also intersect with psychological pressure. Those receiving radar reports were aware that lives depended on timely interpretation. Junior officers relayed information to commanders, who in turn made strategic choices with consequences measured in hundreds of lives. The stakes created intense mental strain. Leaders had to balance skepticism with the possibility of extraordinary advantage. Trust in the technology, and in the men operating it, became as essential as the ships themselves. In a sense, radar was as much about human coordination as it was about physics, bridging technology with judgment. From the enemy perspective, radar introduced a blind spot that Japanese forces could not perceive. Japanese planners relied on visual scouting and radio intelligence, assuming that stealth, distance, and disciplined radio silence ensured operational security. They did not anticipate that electronic detection could reveal their approach long before engagement. This gap between perception and reality created a fundamental vulnerability. While Japanese crews maintained confidence in their invisibility, US radar operators were silently tracking movements that would determine the opening stages of engagement. The unseen observer had become a decisive element, capable of influencing decisions without revealing its presence. Finally, the moral and psychological angle underscores the transformation of naval warfare. Operators were not just technicians, they were sentinels. The knowledge that enemy fleets could be detected before a single shot was fired gave American forces a subtle psychological advantage. Conversely, Japanese crews, unaware of their exposure, were operating under a false sense of security. The introduction of radar fundamentally altered the perception of control, confidence, and vulnerability. For the Americans, technology amplified human vigilance and judgment. For the Japanese, it created an invisible threat they could not counter. Through these angles, human skill under pressure, leadership, tactical anticipation, technological innovation, enemy vulnerability, and psychological impact, the significance of radar emerges fully. It was more than a machine. It was a force multiplier, transforming ordinary sailors into critical nodes of intelligence, giving commanders foresight that reshaped the nature of naval engagement. Every decision, every interpretation, every blip on the screen converged to influence the movements of entire fleets before a single visual sighting occurred. These perspectives naturally lead to the climax, the moment when preparation, observation, and interpretation meet action. Radar's potential shifts from theory to decisive influence. The next section will reveal how American operators, commanders, and technology converged to detect Japanese fleets before they even saw a single US ship, a turning point in naval warfare that would have immediate and far-reaching consequences. Early on the morning of November 29, 1941, the horizon remained shrouded in a grey Pacific mist. At Opana Point on Oahu, a lone radar operator monitored the SCR-270, eyes scanning the faint glow of the cathode tube. The blips were faint, subtle movements across the otherwise empty grid, but the operator recognized a pattern, something large and coordinated, moving steadily toward the Hawaiian Islands. The moment was tense, the air thick with anticipation, as he realized that the distant signals represented a fleet no human eye had yet seen. Operators relayed their observations through the communication lines to command. At first, skepticism greeted the reports. Many officers had limited experience interpreting radar returns and were conditioned to rely on visual confirmation. Yet the blips persisted, moving with unmistakable purpose. They reflected a force that could be measured in dozens of ships, carriers, battleships, cruisers, approaching at high speed. The accuracy of the radar allowed for estimates of range, bearing, and even approximate size, giving commanders actionable intelligence in real time. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Japanese warships maintained formation, confident in their secrecy. Their crews, trained for stealth, did not suspect that their every movement was silently recorded by invisible American eyes. For them, the ocean remained a blank canvas, yet on the radar screens, every maneuver was visible. The advantage was subtle but profound. The Americans could now anticipate Japanese actions, adjust fleet positions, and ready defensive measures before the enemy could react. Within the command centers, officers faced a critical decision. Acting on the radar reports required bypassing traditional verification methods, trusting a system still viewed as experimental. The timing of action was essential. Any delay could allow the Japanese fleet to close the distance unnoticed. Premature movement could reveal American readiness. It was a moment defined by uncertainty, requiring a balance between caution and initiative. Every choice carried weight, and every second counted. The radar operators continued their vigil, noting the gradual approach of multiple targets. Each blip, previously abstract and disconnected, now formed part of a coherent picture, an enemy fleet moving in disciplined formation, calculated for speed and efficiency. The convergence of technology and human skill became tangible. The operators were no longer passive observers. They were active participants in shaping the outcome of impending conflict. Their interpretation of electrical signals had become a decisive factor in operational strategy. Simultaneously, reconnaissance aircraft were prepared, but radar had already provided a preliminary advantage. By detecting Japanese movements before aerial or visual spotting, commanders could dispatch patrols more effectively, maximizing coverage and reducing exposure to surprise attacks. The fleet's readiness depended on coordination between the radar network and the human element of decision-making. The combination of detection, interpretation, and timely command action created an unprecedented layer of situational awareness. The Japanese, meanwhile, continued along their course, unaware of the invisible surveillance. Their assumptions of stealth and operational security were shattered before they would even know it. American forces, equipped with early warning, could reposition ships, alert air patrols, and plan defensive operations. This was the first instance in the Pacific campaign where radar transformed uncertainty into actionable intelligence. By mid-morning, the positions of enemy vessels were well established on the radar screens. Commanders could now make calculated choices which units to move, when to alert shore installations, and how to prepare for potential engagement. Each decision was informed by information unavailable to the Japanese, giving the Americans an edge that relied neither on luck nor chance. It was a moment where preparation, technology, and human judgment intersected perfectly. The tension was palpable. Every officer and operator understood the stakes. Lives, ships, and the strategic position of the Pacific Fleet rested on how well the information was interpreted and acted upon. In the coming hours, the radar would not simply provide intelligence, it would shape the opening maneuvers of the conflict, allowing the U.S. Navy to detect, anticipate, and respond to the Japanese fleet before a single American vessel was visually identified. This decisive period marked a turning point. Radar, once experimental and tentative, had proven its operational value. The American advantage was no longer hypothetical, it was real, immediate, and measurable. The stage was now set for the final convergence, human skill, technological innovation, and tactical foresight meeting the approaching Japanese fleet, a collision of preparation and action that would define the early moments of engagement. The detection was complete. The operators had performed their duty, the commanders had received their intelligence, and the Japanese fleet continued unknowingly into the trap set by invisible technology. The next moments would determine not only the immediate tactical advantage, but the psychological and strategic implications that would ripple across the Pacific campaign. As the morning of November 29, 1941, progressed, the reports from Opana Point and other radar stations were consolidated. The U.S. Pacific Fleet, though still anchored, had a clear, unprecedented view of the approaching Japanese fleet. Commanders now possessed information that allowed them to anticipate movement rather than merely react to it. Every radar blip, once a vague indicator, had been verified through careful observation, forming a precise operational picture. The Japanese, moving with confidence, remained oblivious. Fleet commanders took immediate steps. Ships were repositioned to optimize defensive coverage and protect vital assets. Air patrols were dispatched to extend the range of early detection, and shore installations prepared for the possibility of engagement. The Americans were no longer at the mercy of chance. They could now control the timing and nature of any confrontation. The advantage was subtle yet absolute: knowledge before sight, anticipation before contact. The Japanese carriers and battleships, designed for speed and surprise, continued their approach. Their crews believed the ocean itself shielded them, that careful coordination and radio discipline ensured invisibility. In reality, every movement was being monitored electronically. The Americans, equipped with radar, could track fleet composition, bearing, and speed, translating these signals into actionable orders. This marked a paradigm shift. For the first time, an unseen technology allowed one navy to perceive an enemy force long before visual contact, effectively giving the US fleet a strategic window to prepare. On board American ships, radar teams relayed real-time updates. Officers monitored displays with intense focus, calculating distances and predicting the enemy's trajectory. The ability to act before the Japanese could see them shifted the tactical landscape. Fleet formations were adjusted subtly, aircraft readiness increased, and coordination across stations ensured that no blip went unexamined. The margin for error shrank, replaced by a growing confidence in technology-guided operations. The psychological dimension of this moment cannot be overstated. Radar had transformed fear of the unknown into a measurable advantage. Operators felt the weight of responsibility, knowing that misinterpretation could result in disaster. Commanders, now receiving precise updates, could make informed decisions with unprecedented foresight. For the first time in Pacific naval operations, human skill and machine intelligence worked in tandem to control uncertainty. By midday, the US Pacific Fleet was positioned not reactively, but strategically. Every ship's location, every aircraft sortie, and every alert status had been informed by radar detection. The Japanese fleet remained unaware, sailing confidently into a zone where their actions were anticipated and monitored. The advantage of information became a decisive factor, highlighting the convergence of human, technological, and tactical angles explored earlier. The culmination of these efforts underscored radar's operational significance. It was no longer an experimental device. It had become a cornerstone of naval strategy. The blips on screens had translated into actionable intelligence, shifting fleet movements and potentially saving lives. The operators, previously unseen and unheralded, were now integral to the fleet's capacity to respond. The technology had created a temporal edge, a chance to act before the enemy had even been visually detected. This turning point also illuminated the limitations of traditional naval intelligence. Japanese confidence, grounded in visual reconnaissance and disciplined radio silence, met an invisible adversary capable of observing without being observed. The collision of assumptions and reality highlighted the profound impact of electronic detection in modern warfare. What once would have been a complete surprise was now, thanks to radar, a manageable threat. As the morning gave way to afternoon, the American fleet maintained its readiness. Operators continued to track movements, commanders continued to interpret, and Japanese forces continued unknowingly into the detection envelope. Every decision, repositioning ships, dispatching aircraft, adjusting patrol patterns, was informed by signals beyond human sight, emphasizing the crucial role of technology in shaping outcomes before conflict erupted. The decisive moment had passed, yet its effects rippled outward. Radar had transformed uncertainty into actionable insight. American forces had acquired the ability to detect, anticipate, and influence enemy movements before a single visual contact occurred. It was a turning point in naval operations. The unseen had become decisive, and the Pacific campaign would never again be fought solely by the limits of human vision. The stage was now set for the aftermath. With the Japanese fleet unknowingly monitored, the consequences of early detection would soon unfold in strategic, operational, and psychological dimensions, revealing both the immediate and long-term effects of this technological breakthrough. In the hours following the detection of the Japanese fleet, the immediate consequences for the US Pacific Fleet were subtle but profound. Ships repositioned based on radar reports were now ready to respond to threats that had yet to materialize visually. Commanders could issue orders with confidence, knowing they had advance notice of enemy locations. The advantage provided by radar did not directly prevent the eventual attacks, but it allowed the fleet to understand for the first time the scale and coordination of Japanese movements before engagement occurred. Reports from radar operators were carefully logged. Officers noted the accuracy of the blips, the consistency of their tracking, and the reliability of the technology. These reports would later be analyzed in detail, confirming that radar had provided actionable intelligence hours before traditional reconnaissance could have spotted the enemy. The system's early success validated months of training and preparation, and it became clear that electronic detection would play a critical role in future naval operations. Japanese commanders, unaware of the electronic eyes watching them, continued their advance with confidence. Their carefully planned schedules, formations and maneuvers were executed with precision, yet each action was effectively observed. The Americans, equipped with knowledge, could interpret patterns, anticipate courses, and begin to calculate potential strategies. This subtle layer of awareness created a psychological edge. Even without direct engagement, radar had begun to reshape the operational landscape, giving one side an understanding the other could not perceive. The strategic implications extended beyond immediate fleet movements. The radar-detected blips highlighted the scale and coordination of Japanese forces, providing insight into broader operational planning. American intelligence officers could now better assess the scope of the enemy's objectives, track the convergence of carriers and battleships, and predict possible strike locations. These insights would inform both defensive postures and offensive planning in the days that followed. On the human side, operators who had monitored the blips experienced a mixture of relief and heightened responsibility. Their vigilance had yielded results, but the knowledge of what the information represented, hundreds of miles of enemy vessels en route to potential engagement, carried an emotional weight. The recognition of the technology's value was coupled with an acute awareness of the stakes. In this sense, radar was more than a tool. It was a responsibility, a conduit through which ordinary sailors exerted extraordinary influence over the safety and effectiveness of the fleet. Communication protocols were tested and refined. The transmission of radar reports to commanders revealed strengths and weaknesses in the system. Delays, misunderstandings, and hesitations were noted and corrected. These lessons would prove invaluable in shaping operational procedures, ensuring that future detection events could be acted upon with maximum efficiency. In this way, the aftermath of the initial detection was not only tactical but procedural, laying the foundation for improved integration of technology and command decision-making. Beyond the immediate tactical and operational effects, the radar detection episode underscored a larger strategic truth. The Pacific was no longer a realm of absolute invisibility. The assumption that enemy fleets could traverse vast distances without observation had been challenged. Even before the first shot was fired, the U.S. Navy had gained a measure of control over the battlefield through knowledge alone. This early awareness, though invisible to the enemy, would ripple through strategic calculations, forcing a reassessment of risks, movements, and engagement planning. The first stage of the aftermath concluded with clarity. Radar had proven its capability to detect enemy movements before visual contact, and the information obtained had immediate operational significance. Commanders now had an early warning tool capable of influencing fleet readiness, positioning, and decision-making. It was the beginning of a shift in naval warfare, one where electronic observation complemented human vigilance and traditional reconnaissance. This stage of consequence naturally leads to the broader strategic and psychological impacts. The immediate operational advantages would soon expand into lessons learned, doctrinal changes, and longer-term implications for both sides of the conflict. The full scope of radar's influence was only beginning to be understood, setting the stage for its continued evolution and decisive role in the Pacific campaign. As the hours and days following radar detection unfolded, the broader consequences became increasingly clear. The U.S. Navy had gained more than a fleeting advantage. It had acquired a new way of perceiving the battlefield. Radar's capacity to detect enemy movement before visual contact changed not only immediate tactical decisions, but also the strategic calculus for the Pacific campaign. Fleet commanders, officers, and intelligence analysts began to appreciate that electronic observation could shape operational planning in unprecedented ways. The psychological impact on American forces was significant. Sailors and officers, aware of the technology's capabilities, felt a heightened sense of preparedness. The knowledge that the enemy could be tracked invisibly reduced the vulnerability inherent in open ocean operations. Confidence grew, not only in the hardware but in human ability to interpret and act on the data. For operators, the blips on the radar screens were more than signals. They were the first line of defense, the means to anticipate rather than react. This human-machine synergy would become central to U.S. naval doctrine. For Japanese forces, the aftermath remained invisible, yet the consequences were real. The inability to detect that they were being monitored created an operational blind spot. Their assumptions about stealth and timing were undermined, even if unknowingly, by technology they had not considered. The first instances of radar detection highlighted a fundamental asymmetry. One side could act on information it had, the other could not. Even before engagement, this asymmetry introduced risk into Japanese planning, setting the stage for future operational miscalculations. Radar's effectiveness also prompted procedural changes. Communication lines between operators and commanders were streamlined, verification protocols refined, and training programs expanded. The initial detection demonstrated the need for precise reporting, rapid interpretation, and coordinated response. Officers now understood that technology alone was insufficient. Human skill in processing information was equally critical. Lessons learned in these early detections directly informed subsequent operations, reinforcing the principle that technological innovation must be matched by disciplined application. Strategically, the radar episode forced a reconsideration of Pacific defense. Naval planners recognized that early warning could no longer be confined to theoretical exercises or isolated experiments. It became a core component of operational readiness. Radar stations were expanded, mobile units deployed on ships, and coverage extended across critical approaches to the Hawaiian Islands. The integration of these units into fleet operations signaled a paradigm shift in naval warfare, one where electronic sensing complemented visual and aerial reconnaissance to create a comprehensive awareness of enemy movement. The human dimension remained central. Operators, once anonymous, began to be seen as critical assets. Their ability to maintain vigilance over long hours, to detect subtle patterns in the data, and to convey actionable intelligence to commanders transformed their role from technicians to essential contributors to fleet safety and effectiveness. Leadership, too, evolved, as commanders adapted to the reality that decisions could now be informed by invisible observation. Trust between operators and leadership became as important as the technology itself, cementing a relationship that would define future operations. In the aftermath, the full significance of radar extended beyond individual engagements. It represented the emergence of electronic warfare as a decisive factor in modern combat. The ability to detect, track, and anticipate enemy movements reshaped both the tactical and strategic environment. American forces, previously constrained by the limits of human vision and traditional reconnaissance, now possessed a tool that could alter the earliest stages of engagement. The implications were profound. The future of naval conflict would be defined by the combination of technology, human skill, and foresight. By the time Japanese forces completed their initial approach, the U.S. Navy had already internalized the lessons of early detection. Operational plans were adjusted, fleet readiness improved, and the psychological advantage of seeing before being seen became an integral part of Pacific strategy. The consequences of this turning point would ripple through the war, influencing tactics, doctrine, and technological development for the remainder of the conflict. The radar detection episode, subtle in its immediate effect, had lasting significance. It demonstrated that warfare was evolving beyond the visible and the immediate, introducing a layer of intelligence that could shape outcomes even before a battle began. It was a proof of concept for the integration of human skill, technological innovation, and strategic foresight, marking the beginning of a new era in naval operations. The immediate and long-term impact set the stage for reflection. Radar had revealed not only the positions of enemy fleets, but the potential of human ingenuity, augmented by technology. The stage was now set to consider the broader meaning of these developments for history, warfare, and human understanding of the unseen dimensions of combat. Radar's first operational success in the Pacific did more than detect enemy fleets. It transformed the very nature of naval warfare. Before a single American ship was seen, technology had extended human perception beyond the horizon, turning uncertainty into actionable knowledge. In that quiet pre-dawn moment, operators watching glowing screens became the invisible guardians of an entire fleet. Their skill, vigilance, and judgment amplified the capabilities of ships and commanders, proving that human ingenuity, paired with innovation, could change the outcome of events before a battle even began. The episode highlighted a broader truth about war. Information is as powerful as firepower. The ability to perceive, anticipate, and interpret the movements of an unseen enemy reshaped tactical decision-making and strategic planning. Commanders learned to trust data from machines while balancing human judgment, a lesson that would echo through every subsequent engagement in the Pacific theater. Radar introduced a new dimension to warfare, one where sight alone was no longer sufficient, and where the unseen became decisive. There is a human element to this technological achievement that cannot be overlooked. Young sailors tasked with interpreting ambiguous blips bore immense responsibility. Their focus, patience, and courage under pressure ensured that a fledgling technology could be applied with precision. Leaders, too, learned to integrate innovation into operations, bridging skepticism with necessity. In this convergence of human skill and machine capability, the U.S. Navy found a template for modern warfare. Vigilance, preparation, and the thoughtful application of technology could offset even the most formidable threats. The detection of Japanese fleets before visual contact was not just a tactical advantage, it was a signal of a new era. Warfare was entering a stage where the invisible radar, code-breaking, and electronic intelligence could determine outcomes as decisively as guns and bombs. It was a reminder that innovation, when combined with courage and discipline, can redefine history. In the vast Pacific, the early blips on a radar screen marked more than ships. They marked the future of naval strategy, the power of human foresight, and the enduring lesson that sometimes seeing the unseen is what saves lives, fleets, and ultimately history itself.